In this video, we're going to do a couple of examples of changing from rectangular coordinates to polar coordinates. In other words, we're going to be given a point in the XY plane, and we're going to convert that to an equivalent point in the polar plane. Now, one thing that we have to take note of is that anytime we're converting from the XY plane to the polar plane, we always have to be given parameters in the polar plane. You'll notice in this example is we're asked to convert the rectangular coordinates to polar coordinates with r greater than 0 and with theta being between 0 and 2 pi. Now, if our r is greater than 0 and theta is between 0 and 2 pi, that's kind of what we consider standard form for polar coordinates, with r being greater than 0 and theta being from 0 to 2 pi. But when we make this conversion from rectangular to polar, we always have to be given those two parameters. We have to be told, do you want my r to be positive or negative? And do you want my theta to be between 0 and 2 pi, or some other parameters that were maybe given? So in this example, we're going to convert the point -1, 1 into polar coordinates with an r greater than 0 and a theta between 0 and 2 pi. Since we're given an x and a y, we can use that to find the r. We know that r squared has to be equal to x squared plus y squared. X squared would be -1 squared plus y squared would be 1 squared. And that's equal to 1 plus 1, which is equal to 2. So r squared is equal to 2. When we solve this equation, r squared equals 2, there are two solutions. R could be equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. Well, if we look back up here in our instructions tell us that we're looking for an r that is greater than 0. So we'll have to choose the positive square root of 2 in this case. All right, so we found r. Now we need to find theta. To find theta, we can use tangent of theta is equal to y over x. So tangent of theta is equal to y is 1, x is -1. So tangent of theta is equal to -1. There are two thetas, or two angles, between 0 and 2 pi that have a tangent value of -1. Tangent is negative in the second and fourth quadrants. So the angles that we're looking for would have to be theta is equal to 3 pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. 3 pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4 both have a tangent value of -1 on the interval from 0 to 2 pi. So we have two angles from which to choose at this point. Both of them are between 0 and 2 pi, so which angle is the right angle to choose? To make that determination, we have to look back at our original point that we're given. The point -1, 1. In the xy plane, that point is located in the second quadrant. So the angle that I choose from these two thetas has to be an angle in the second quadrant. 3 pi over 4 is that angle. So the point -1, 1, when converted to polar coordinates, is the point r, which is square root of 2, comma, 3 pi over 4. Now let's just do a what-if scenario real quick. What if this problem had asked us to find the polar coordinates for the point -1, 1 with an r less than 0 rather than an r greater than 0? So we'll do all this down here in pencil. If we were looking for an r less than 0, well then obviously we would have had to have chosen the negative square root of 2 rather than the positive square root of 2, because we need a negative r value. So the question is, which angle would we have chosen to go with this negative r value of negative square root 2? Well, we couldn't have chosen 3 pi over 4, because the angle 3 pi over 4 puts us in the second quadrant. And then if we go square root of 2 units in the opposite direction of that 3 pi over 4, that puts us in the fourth quadrant. Well, that wouldn't work because the point -1, 1 is in the second quadrant. So if we choose the negative r value here, we would have had to have chosen the angle 7 pi over 4 to go with that negative r value. The angle 7 pi over 4 puts us in the fourth quadrant, but then we have to go opposite that angle square root of 2 units, which would put us in the second quadrant, which is exactly where we need to be. All right, let's take a look at this example. Here again, we're converting the rectangular coordinates that were given, and we want to convert those to polar coordinates. This time, we're told to convert with an r less than 0, and our angle theta still being between 0 and 2 pi. All right, first step is to find r. We know that r squared is equal to x squared plus y squared. That means r squared is equal to 5 times the square root of 3 over 2 squared plus 5/2 squared. 5 square root of 3 over 2 squared is 25 times 3, which is 75 over 2 squared, which is 4, plus 5/2 squared, which is 25 over 4, which is equal to 100 over 4. 100 divided by 4 is 25. So r squared is equal to 25. Now taking the square root of both sides would give us that r is equal to plus or minus 5, because the square root of 25 is 5 and the square root of r squared is r. But in this case, we have to choose an r less than 0, which means we have to choose r to be equal to -5. Now let's find theta. To find theta, we know we're going to use tangent of theta equals y over x. Well, that's equal to 5/2 divided by 5 times the square root of 3 over 2, which is equal to 5/2 times 2 over 5 times the square root of 3. 5's divide out, 2's divide out, which leaves us 1 over the square root of 3. Now that figure doesn't look familiar to me, so I'm going to rationalize. When we rationalize 1 over the square root of 3, we get the square root of 3 over 3. Again, there are two thetas that have a tangent value of square root of 3 over 3 between 0 and 2 pi. Those two thetas are pi over 6 and 7 pi over 6. Pi over 6 is in the first quadrant, 7 pi over 6 is in the third quadrant. According to our given point here, x comma y, 5 square root of 3 over 2 comma 5/2 is a point in the first quadrant. So ultimately, we want to be in the first quadrant. But in this case, I can't choose pi over 6 as my angle, because pi over 6 is an angle in the first quadrant, but I notice I need a negative r value. If I choose pi over 6, that puts me in the first quadrant, but a negative r value puts me in the third. So I cannot choose pi over 6. However, if I choose 7 pi over 6 to be my angle, 7 pi over 6 is an angle in the third quadrant with a negative r value. That negative r value puts my point in the first quadrant, which is exactly where I want to be. So this point would be the point -5, comma 7 pi over 6.